In this part, we will discuss about the Declaration of Emergency 1975. With the 1971 election results, Indira Gandhi firmly established her dominance in the Indian political system. Once again, she introduced a number of welfare policies and became very popular. Indira Gandhi played a crucial role in the strengthening policy of the party system, which was divided in 1967. But in the internal conflicts in Congress, we find still there is some crisis as well as some problems. The problem was not only internal, but also the problem was between the executive as well as in judiciary. A number of judgments went against the interest of the Congress. Dissatisfied with it, Congress declared that judiciary is an old-fashioned institution and hence it has been opposing the pro-poor policies of the government. The conflict between Congress and judiciary in detail started in Indian political system. The opposition parties felt that Congress policies became individual centric. Therefore, the judicial system criticized it, as well as the opposition parties understood that government authority is centralized in the hands of the Indira Gandhi. Therefore, another type of conflict started. An important slogan of 1971 election was Indira Gandhi's motive, or Indira Gandhi's systematic policy was Garibi Hatao. With this slogan, Congress promised to the people that the party will remove poverty from India. Unfortunately, the socio-economic conditions of poor did not improve. On the other hand, the Bangladesh war created an economic crisis in India. After this war, US stopped all kind of support to India. The rise of price of oil also led to the rise of prices of other things in India. As the pace of industrial development was very slow, unemployment was high at that time, especially in the rural areas. This proved to be a big problem. To bring down expenses, government stopped the salaries of the government employees. This made them angry towards the government. In 1970 to 73, late monsoons brought down agricultural production. In such an uncertain situation, majority of Indians became dissatisfied. It became very easy for the opposition parties to involve the common people in anti-Congress rallies and movements. Therefore, students' movement emerged strongly in this decade. One faction of Marxists who did not believe in parliamentary system became desperate for armed revolution. This faction is called Marxist-Leninist or Naxalite. This group believed in armed revolution to end capitalist system. It is to be discussed a little about that Naxalite movement. This armed movement started in West Bengal in 1967. In the hilly district of Darjeeling, a farmers' rebel group was formed under the local Communist Party of Indian Marxist leaders in the area of Naxalbari area. This movement spread quickly to other areas. This movement is called Naxalite movement. Later, a faction party of India, Marxist-Leninist. Later, this party also had to experience division. The Naxalites snatched land from rich landlords and distributed it among the poor. This movement was suppressed by the West Bengal's Congress Chief Minister, Mr. Siddhartha Roy. Even now, inspired by this movement, Maoists are operating in the Adivashi dominated areas of Bihar, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand, as well as in some parts of West Bengal. So now talk about declaration of emergency. As a result of Allahabad High Court judgment, Indira Gandhi had to vacate her parliamentary seat as well as post of prime minister. But within 6 months, she again became a member of the parliament. In response to her appeal, the Supreme Court put on her some part of earlier judgment on 24 June 1975. According to the Supreme Court judgment, she could continue as an MP but could not take part in parliamentary proceedings. The executive judiciary conflict, Indira Gandhi attitude, a number of socio-economic problems pushed the country to chaos. At this time, Joy Prakash Narayan strengthened his movement against Indira. Under his leadership, the opposition parties demanded Indira Gandhi's resignation. Joy Prakash Narayan declared a nationwide call to celebrate Satyagraha against Indira Gandhi and appealed to army, CRPF, police and other government officials not to do illegal and unethical acts. As a result, government activities came to a standstill. The entire political system again stood against Congress. At this time, Indira Gandhi's supporters, Siddhartha Roy, suggested her to declare emergency due to internal disturbances. He himself prepared the draft of the letter to be sent to the president. Ultimately, according to Article 352, emergency was declared on 25th June 1975. According to government, the internal disturbances were a threat to the country's security. During emergency, India's federal system became unitary. All the powers of the states were transferred to the central government. On the night of 25th June 1975, Indira Gandhi advised President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed to declare emergency. We should mention here that after completing all the formalities, Indira Gandhi told the president to declare emergency. That means declaration of emergency by president was just a formality, and the black chapter of Indian democracy began. From the midnight of 25th June 1975, electricity supply to all the newspaper offices were cut off. Next day, a large number of the leaders and workers of the opposition parties were arrested early morning. On the morning of 26 June, the cabinet was formally informed about emergency. So, what was the consequence of emergency? During emergency, Indira Gandhi concentrated of holding the power in her own hands and cut down civil liberties as well as any freedom of political opposition. Her government gave the exploitation form of system and also explain that strikes, popular movements will hamper the government works as well as national economy, and hence they were being banned. All protests came to a halt. A number of political leaders like Joy Prakash Narayan, Raj Narayan, then Morarji Desai, Chaudhry Charan Singh, they even Atal Bihari Vajpayee were arrested and put in jail. Government cut off the freedom of press. In such a situation, newspapers required the approval of the government before publishing any news. This is called press censorship. Government banned a number of groups like Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangha, Jamaat-e Islami. A large number of communist leaders were also arrested. All fundamental rights were suspended during emergency. Government implemented the Preventive Detention Act during emergency. According to this, people can be arrested before doing anything on the assumption that he will commit a crime. Under this act, The government arrested a large number of opposition leaders, and these leaders could not even claim protection under writs like habeas corpus and others. A number of laws were passed during the time. These acts were called black laws. According to these acts, a person can be jailed without any trial. The Maintenance of Internal Security Act was used extensively. According to the Amnesty International, during emergency, even without trial, 1,40,000 people were arrested. During emergency, government denied the people's basic rights and freedom. There was protest against such brutal suppression by the government. Some leaders who were not arrested initially went underground and started to organize protest against government. Similarly, newspapers like Indian Express, Statesman protested by keeping the space of the news censored by the government blank. Journals like Seminar and Mainstream show their protest by stopping their publications. Many journals who wrote against emergency were arrested, opposing an attack on democracy. Many poets even and other writers returned their Padma Bhushan and Padma Shri to the government. Parliament during emergency made a number of amendments. Parliament made a law that judiciary cannot challenge the validity of the election of Prime Minister, President and Vice President. The important 42nd Amendment was introduced during emergency. In this amendment, the time period of Lok Sabha and Legislative Assembly were extended from 5 years to 6 years. The result of the emergency was like suspension of fundamental rights, censorship of freedom of press, preventive detention acts passed, opposition leaders and workers were arrested, federal structure changed to unitary structure, protest strikes were declared illegal. Then controversy regarding emergency started. Emergency is one of the most controversial events that happened in independent India. Except this, the democratic and political system of India did face such a crisis. A question arises at this point: was emergency necessary? After declaring emergency, Indira Gandhi tried to justify her action in her speech delivered on 22nd July in Parliament. According to her, this was completely constitutional and it was done to safeguard our constitution and democracy. She said that the opposition must cooperate with the government. On the other hand, a large number of protest movement has been obstruct or stop the smooth functioning of the government. While majority of the political parties opposed this step of Congress, Communist Party of India and some other pressure groups supported this act of Congress. According to these parties, the opposition to Congress was a part of international conspiracy. CPI termed the movement led by Jayaprakash Narayan as a movement of the middle class, but later the party accepted that their position on emergency was wrong. Influential political people like Acharya Vinoba Bhave, Mother Teresa, J.R.D. Tata extended support to emergency. Vinoba Bhave called the period Anushashan Parva or time for discipline. Indira Gandhi decided to declare emergency mainly for three reasons: Indo-Pak War of 1971, decline in food production in 1972-73, and the rise in oil price in 1973-74. Then next, the students' movement in Bihar 1974, the Navanirman movement in Gujarat, Congress defeat in State Assembly in 1974, and railway strike. Next, the judgment of Allahabad High Court that said Indira Gandhi's victory in 1971 election was invalid. According to the crisis of emergency, the justifications forwarded by Indira Gandhi are not acceptable. According to Jayaprakash Narayan and others, in a democracy, people have the right to protest against the government. The movements of Gujarat and Bihar were not violent. These movements cannot be accused of threatening national security. The leaders were also arrested, were not involved in any anti-national activity. In fact, no complaint was logged against majority of those arrested. There was no major law and order problem. Hence, we can say that emergency was declared solely to fulfill the selfish interest of the party or Mrs. Indira Gandhi. During emergency, the government declared a number of policies. According to the government, the aim of emergency was to bring law and order, increase efficiency, and introduce welfare policies for poor. Indira Gandhi introduced 20 points program. This much discussed program had interesting policies like land reform, land redistribution, labor taking part in management, end of bonded labor. According to many, this program helped in increase of agricultural production, infrastructure building, exports, etc. The communal riot protest movements that took place in 1970, 60s to 70 came to an end, and due to the strict discipline imposed on government employees, the middle class were happy with the government's efficiency. On the other hand, the poor also felt that they will be benefited from the government's welfare policies. Hence, people from different classes had different expectations from emergency. But the emergency period took a dangerous form. According to the critics, the politics declared by Indira Gandhi was to distract the people from the bad effect of emergency. Most of the promises of Indira Gandhi were not fulfilled. Instead, oppressive policies became dominant. Congress repressured the opposition brutally. During this period, some people who were involved in any public office started playing an important role. This was an accusation against Indira Gandhi's younger son, Sanjay Gandhi. He interfered in the working of the government. He made a controversial role in demolishing Delhi's Turkman Gate and forced sterilization of man and woman. He demolished the slums in Delhi. One such a place was Turkman Gate. The houses of this area were demolished. Emergency period had a negative impact on the lives of people. Many people lost their lives because of torture. An engineering student of Calicut Engineering College named P. Rajan lost his life due to horrifying torture in police custody. Critics say that democracy died during emergency. What was the lesson from the emergency? Indian political system learned a number of lessons from the emergency period. For example, emergency period brought out the strength and weakness of Indian democracy. After emergency, democracy in India became stronger and more vibrant. This proved that even during emergency, Indian democracy was not completely over. The importance of free judiciary and bureaucracy was felt during emergency. Bureaucracy should be neutral and be loyal to the constitution and not the ruling party. Similarly, the judiciary should not be under the ruling party and should safeguard the rights of the citizens. The government should always rule according to the provisions of the constitution. Constitution is supreme and Supreme Court must safeguard its sanctity. Without this, the constitution will be threatened. During this period, the ambiguity present in the constitution around emergency was removed. At present, internal emergency can be declared only in case of armed rebellion. The Council of Ministers must give a written advice to the president to declare emergency. Emergency made people aware about their civil liberties. Judiciary also started playing an active role in safeguarding the rights and liberties of citizens. During this time, a number of organizations were formed, among them the People's Union for Civil Liberties and Democratic Rights. In a conference held in 1980, it was renamed as People's Union for Civil Liberties. Emergency also taught the lesson that the freedom of news medium should be safeguarded. For the success of democracy, a free and fair media is required. Media plays an important role in creating awareness among the citizens. Two important questions arise here. It is believed that a strong opposition is important for the success of democracy. Opposition can stop the government from becoming authoritarian. Opposition carries on protest both inside and outside the parliament to keep in check the ruling party. But what amount of protest can help a democracy in an important question is an important question. At present, in the name of protest, proceedings are disrupted very badly in the parliament and state assemblies. Political representatives often get into fights. Such protests do not help democracy, rather, it weakens democracy. Secondly, emergency period exposed the politicians politicization of police and administration. Use of police and administration for political use can lead to the dangerous result. But even today, political leaders try to use police and administration for their political gain. So that's all for today's class. We will discuss about the politics after emergency in our next classes. তো আজকের জন্য ছুটি.